over the cheerless, ill-lighted parlour of the Cheaper Sleeper Motel, the ebony grandfather clock dutifully maintained its watch. Nestled in a corner, amidst the cocoon of cobweb and shadow, however, the antique timekeeper offered little to attract notice. Its hands moved without sound, and by degrees, imperceptible. Although its pendulum swung sprightly from one side to the other, the hypnotic pulse of this activity served only to deepen the gloom pervading the outworn furniture. Lackluster curtains and insipid paintings that together defined the stewardship granted the old clock. But, at length, the mahogany guardian betrayed the relative invisibility of its vigil, suddenly announcing from its mechanical lungs the arrival of the evening's 8 o'clock hour. Then, just as suddenly, returning to the solemnity of its former station. As the eighth and final of these knellings quit the room, the door flew open, arousing into a clamour the bell that hung over it, and carrying in, on an icy gust of autumn beyond, an elderly man of no few afflictions. He was markedly emaciated. In stature, he might have stood above an average height, were it not for a pronounced hunch in his back, a deformity little concealed by the tattered long coat that enveloped him. His wearied visage glowed with a pallor almost cadaverous, while deep furrows, reaching into the gossamer hair, dippling his alabaster scalp, traversed his lofty forehead. Beneath his wrinkled eyelids resided a pair of sparkling blue organs, whose erratic movements he seemed powerless to control. His nose gave little evidence of shape. A meager collection of clearly neglected teeth protruded wildly from beneath his dark, meaty lips, these latter assuming an infinite variety of contortions as their owner dragged in behind him a large, black, and very strange suitcase. This suitcase, which really was more of a wooden trunk with a handle, had much about it in the way of novelty. First, it was of such size that large fails to provide an adjective of sufficient strength, for only after protracted labour did the old man manage to manoeuvre the bulky article through the door. Second, its shape was not the customary rectangular, but rather pentagonal, with one side bearing its hinges, and the corner opposite them, its handle. Lastly, this handle, ivory by looks, ranked the most curious feature. It had been carved to resemble a curled skeletal finger. Leaving this burden at the door, the traveller hobbled his way to the reception desk. Here sat a rather homely young woman, who, perhaps unaware of his entrance, continued to browse a magazine while casually sipping a cup of coffee at the turn of each page. She wore an expression of indiscriminate contempt. A cigarette smouldered in an ashtray by her side, and a paunched tabby, of no particular colour, slumbered in her lap. Behind her, a rusty fan wheezed like a doomed asthmatic, its metallic breath gently stirring her auburn hair. In a trembling voice, the old man spoke.
Excuse me, but I believe I had a reservation for a Henry Peddlestone.
The woman reluctantly pulled her gaze from the magazine. Setting aside with a heavy sigh, she removed from her desk a guest list and scanned the catalogue of names, dates, and other notations scribbled upon it. This examination complete, she could only conclude,
"Nope, your name isn't here."
With a shrug of her shoulders, she resumed her literary disport, her participation in the dialogue plainly at its end. Dismay tortured the face of the would-be customer. His brows knitted over his eyes. His lips merged nearly each into the other. For some time, the command of speech appeared to elude him, though eventually he recovered his oral faculty and pressed on.
I'm pretty sure I secured these reservations about a week ago.
Well,
she snarled.
I'm pretty sure your name isn't on this list. And I'm pretty sure All our rooms have been taken for the night.
And,
Henry meekly began to dispute the clerk, but quickly abandoned the effort. Turning away from her instead, he reached into his coat, and from it produced a small piece of folded yellow paper. This he unfolded for such a moment, until realizing that the woman, who was no doubt intrigued by his cryptic behavior, had leaned over his shoulder in an attempt to steal a glimpse of the document. Hurriedly replacing it into his coat, he turned again to face her.
well, are there any other motels around that I might...
This is the only one we got.
She answered perfunctorily, showing the old man a dismissive roll of her fingers as she sank back into her chair. When his subsequent inquiries failed to evoke any further response from the woman, Henry sulked out the door, dragging the strange suitcase behind him.